a topic that we probably should talk about before Phillies Dodgers, and it's Kyle Schwarber's start to the season. Because Kyle Schwarber, to this point, has been everything you need him to be. He has been everything and more in terms of a guy that has had to, at times, lead off when Trey Turner was out injured. He's off to a hell of a start, hitting .308 this season. He looks every bit like a guy you cannot allow to reach free agency. And I get it. He's 32. Or just recently turned 32 years old last month. And I get how these guys can break down after the age of 32, 33. And I get that conceptually his best years might be behind him. Or at least historical precedent would kind of point towards the fact that Schwarber should be very much like at or near the end of his peak powers and now starting to descend into madness. But he's been so freaking good for this team. And I get it, it's only 6 games. But if you look at what he's done in his tenure as a Philly, the numbers are bananagrams. And if you think about what this lineup would look like without that power in it, it's not the prettiest picture. I think that at some point we have to start to have the legitimate conversation around whether or not it's ever going to be too early to re-sign Kyle Schwarber. I mean, just consider this, right? For the last 3 seasons that he's been in town, home runs, 46, 47, 38. RBIs, 94, 104, 104. This guy has been a bona fide stud in this lineup. Schwarber went from being like a funny little gimmick to being the truth and something that you expect almost every time he comes up to the plate. And so while Rob Thompson's going to continue to experiment with Trey Turner at the top of the lineup sometimes, and Schwarber will get in there at the top of the lineup sometimes, it's kind of hard to argue at this point that Schwarber hasn't been one of the most valuable players for this Phillies team so far. I don't know how you could possibly let him get to free agency. Now, at 32 years old, is he looking for the final contract of his career? Is he going to look for a 5 or 6 year deal? If that's the case, maybe it is a stumbling block, and maybe it is something that you have to address in the offseason and let him find his market. But if you can give him a 3-year deal, 4-year deal max, and you come in somewhere in the $30-ish million range, does he say no to that? Does that feel like a low ball? I mean, just like in theory, right? Consider. He's up to 4 home runs already, 8 RBI thus far through 6 games. Let's just assume that he gets back to at least 30 home runs and 90 RBI because he's done that every time or every season that he's been here. If you could get some kind of productivity over the next 3 years that averages out to be 30 homers, 90 RBI, is that worth $30 million a year? I'd argue there's a good chance that it is. And I'd argue that a guy who knows how to play in this city, has been embraced by this city, and understands how to stand up to pressure in this city is a guy that's absolutely worth keeping around. I don't think I'm wrong. And I'll go back to this. Did he have a good postseason last year against the Mets? He did not. It was disastrous. He hit 125. Very few guys on that team were hitting. You go back to the year they went to the World Series, he had 10 home runs in the postseason, 15 RBI. You go to the following postseason, 6 homers, 9 RBI. I tend not to look at the average as much with Schwarber because, in fairness, the goal for him each and every time at bat is to pound that ball into the gaps, sure. Hit one out of the park if he's at the top of the lineup, sure. Now, average will matter a little bit more, I would argue, if he's hitting a little bit lower in the lineup. I know that in theory you want him to get on base any way that he can. How's he going to be able to draw as many walks as you probably need him to? He's got to hit for power. So, there is a balance that he has to kind of toe. But there's nobody who looked at Kyle Schwarber for his career and said, oh, yeah, this is a guy that's going to hit 300, or this is a guy that's going to hit 280. He's always been a low-ish 200s hitter. He's had a few anomalies where he's hit around 250. But like for the most part, he's a low 200s hitter. But he gets on base, he draws walks, he pounds the ball out of the park. He, to me, is about as valuable as anybody on this team. And so, like, I don't think we're too early in the season to have the conversation. If I were the Phillies, would be doing whatever it takes to ensure that he's happy, he's taken care of for the next few years, and that he doesn't hit free agency. You need to keep this guy here. I get that there's a potential roadblock in that he's your DH. He really can't play the field. Bryce Harper has, in fact, and let's be fair, Harper has volunteered himself to go back to the outfield if they can sign somebody to play first base. Obviously, Vladdy Guerrero Jr. would be a hell of an addition. But, like, Schwarber can hold down the DH. Does it cause a problem down the line with JT Realmuto when his years behind the plate are done? Probably not. I would assume that they'd be much more likely to move on from JT Realmuto than they would want to move on from Schwarber, but I could be wrong. Let me see. I just saw Jamie Rolla put a comment over here. Schwarber, you keep as your DH. JT, though, unless he takes a huge pay cut, we need to move on from when the contract is up. Because the other tricky thing there is, like, we've seen catchers go from being catchers to playing first base. Is there a scenario where JT Realmuto provides real value for you at first base? That's possible, but then it's probably going to be for a lot more money than you want to pay him for the productivity that he's going to give you. Oh, and by the way, he's playing first base instead of catcher. But I would be legitimately shocked. I just think that Schwarber's a guy, like, we go back to the offseason, if you remember. Or no, yes, it was in the offseason. Or it was maybe spring training. I played the clip. He was on WIP's morning show, I believe. And he talked about that disappointment and that sinking feeling of coming up short year after year after year, and how it eats at him and how it eats at the guys in the locker room. And you think about that in totality, and you go, that's a guy that you want to have in your clubhouse. He's a well-respected guy. If it were me, you get the guy signed. You get him signed as soon as possible. Adam Glickus agrees, says pay the man. Landros, too, says 3 years, $90 million, get Schwarber signed to an extension. Landros says that if Schwarber was a Flyer, culture alone gets him a new deal. I tend to agree.